Hello, everyone. Today we are going to discuss the World War I and how Great Britain was involved, it was also one of the key players during the First World War. So we have been discussing about the conditions before the political and economic conditions or situation of Britain before the First World War. We have discussed the very economically affluent Victorian period, like when Queen Victoria was the monarch from 1837 to 1901. So England was really very economically affluent. They had this colonization, and as I said, it was for the national interest. They overlooked the exploitation of the people of the colonies, and then Britain witnessed the Industrial Revolution. So there was this economic boom, the production of from the iron and steel. There were production of bridges and infrastructures were built, bridges were built, and hotels were built, railroads were built. So this is from the rural image of Britain. During the Victorian period, Britain entered into a very city life, a very urban life, a very economically affluent country, and on top of that, London was really the global city. It attracted tourists from the different parts of the world, and so this was a very positive side of Victorian period. And then with the Industrial Revolution, we did, which started in Britain, we did discuss that how it led to exploitation of child labor and the long working hours. The women were also had to work long working hours. But the positive side was that there was this labor reform, factory reform for the improvement of the labors, and so step by step the working class through their voices and collective effort, they did get some of the reforms from the government to improve the factory situation and the situation of the laborers. So this is the positive side of the Industrial Revolution, but the negative side, we have discussed how the weapons were through steel, how weapons were produced, and eventually it was used during the First World War. So again, in the Industrial Revolution, there was this we saw the writings of Charles Dickens, who really reflected the society during that period. How was it like child labor, exploitation, and so because he worked in the factory at the age of 12, so he really, through his writings, he really upheld the economic situation, like the minority or the disadvantaged people's situation through his writings. So we can see the positive and negative side during the period. But after Queen Victoria died in 1901, her son, he came to power, but he was a weak ruler. So, and it was King Edward came to power. So, and he was a weak ruler, and and it is known as the Edwardian period. And but since Britain already achieved its economic affluency, it was before the First World War, it was just regarded as the economic superpower, sort of power in the world. It reached its naval navy, naval supremacy, and so on the other hand, Germany also was competing for naval supremacy. So this is somehow somewhat the economic position of Britain. So Britain was pretty ready to get involved in a war, because it was really well equipped with its arms and ammunitions, weapons, and naval power, and all the aspect that is needed for a country to get involved in a war. So this is the economic side and of Britain. But again, if we see the race relation side or the minority issues, as I have mentioned earlier, that the Jews were marginalized, and I think in the late 13th century, around 1290, Jews were expelled from Britain, and then during the time of Cromwell, during the time of the Puritan ruler Oliver Cromwell, they started coming to England. And that was in the 17th century. But now, before the First World War, between 1870 to 1914, Jews were from all over the world, particularly from Eastern Europe. They started coming to Britain, and so this is we need to see the social situation of Britain before the First World War. So on one hand, there were some Jews, already established Jews, and they belonged to this affluent class, and they were already established. But the new immigrants, the Jews who were Jewish people who were migrating during that period, 1870 to 1914, they were just new immigrants, and they were a struggling community, as it is always with the new immigrant. They can be a struggling community, and as years passes by, years goes by, with the period of time when the immigrants get settled, they feel connected, they feel they are more economically affluent, and so it takes a while for the immigrants to establish themselves in their host country, in the new country. So similarly, this composition of the new Jewish people and the old Jewish people, so there has been sort of tension between these two groups. So the old settled Jewish people, they were not much accepting of the new Jewish people. So there was some cultural dilemma between the two. There was this economic issues between the two. So there has been all these issues with these social issues before the First World War, and we really need to know the social issues, because during the First World War, we will find how things shaped up, and that led to the emergence or the creation of Israel, and that led to the Palestine question, and that's how the Jewish people from all over the world, they migrated to Israel after the Second World War. So this pattern we really need to know from the British history, because the British policymakers, they decided, they had some policies and they had some plots or plans that paved the way for the creation of Israel. But then again, the Palestine question, we still know about the Palestine question. It is still a concern, or it's a global concern, like the Palestinians are still marginalized in their own territory. So we need to see this different aspects. So I've just discussed the economic aspect. Britain was affluent with the social aspect, like they were having these new immigrants, and there were tensions between the immigrants, and politically it was pretty stable before and as I said, before the First World War, again there was this Fabian Society that was established in 1884. That is also we need to consider, because that was the outcome of the discrepancies between the between the marginalized people and the upper class economically affluent people. So there is this there was this big gap. So out of this discrepancy and disparity, one of the reasons of the founding of the Fabian Society was one of the reasons was this, that economic disparity, and that's why they went for social reform. And with the gender issues, women were still marginalized, and I mean, regardless of any race or ethnicity, the mainstream British women were marginalized, and we will see how after the First World War they started getting their rights. So we need to really consider all these factors, and that is also, then we know how Britain was like before the First World War. So there is this lecture, you will see the segment in box, which is which says that which is titled as pre-war period, pre-World War I period. And so this is briefly, I have summarized about that period. And politically, again, before the pre-World War period, the international affairs, we also need to consider British international affairs. For example, the Anglo-Boyle War in South Africa. So the Boers were known as the Afrikaners, the people of Dutch background. They settled in South Africa a long time ago, and so now that was their colony. They established themselves over there, and but Britain had interest in South Africa. So, and as we know, the British excuse me, foreign policy has been expansion and colonization. So, and that is how Britain was also motivated in Africa to expand its territory. And so, and now their target was South Africa. So they had this war in 1901. So that is known as the Boer War. And and there were two Boer Wars. And so then after that, Britain won in the war between this Afrikaners people of Dutch background and the British. And so they got hold of two territory of South Africa. I think Cape Town was one of the territories of South Africa. So we can see Britain has established themselves. Before the First World War, they had colonies in different places of the world. They had colonies in the Indian subcontinent. It was a British colony. They established a colony in South Africa, and after the Boer War, and then later on, in the First World War, they occupied German territories, German colonies in Africa, the East Africa, and some West African German colonies. So this is how Britain has been expanding their. This was their the colonization and expansion spree that was Britain was going through. And again, as I said, it has always looked after its national interest, for its economic interest. And so that is how it had pursued a policy of expansion, regardless, I mean, whatever way they could. Mostly through colonization. So these are the economic, social, political, which includes international affairs, the aspects of Britain. So I have also mentioned in economic, social, political aspects of Britain that we need to consider before what was Britain like before the First World War. And so what were the causes? Another segment of today's lecture in the box, you will find the causes of the First World War. So what were the causes of First World War? That's again, we need to consider how the First World War, from a local situation, it has emerged into the First World War. So there was this alliance between the European countries before the First World War. So that's again a part of the international policy of Britain. So there was this alliance between known as Triple Alliance between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. So, but it in 1882, but Italy during the First World War left this Triple Alliance and joined the Allied powers, which was Britain, France, Soviet Union, and the United States. And with this is Triple Alliance, and there was another alliance with Britain, France, and Soviet Union in 1904, and that was known as Triple Entente. And so we can see that there were some developments, there were some alliance among the European countries. And so when there was this First World War, I mean, they were already grouped, and so they were all allies, and that's the reason they had alliances and allies, the French, to be grouped, one group against the other. During the First World War, as you all know, that it was between 1914 to 1918. So the Allied powers were Britain, France, Soviet Union, and Soviet Union, and later America joined the Allied powers. In 1917, America joined the Allied powers. America didn't want to join because the people of America, they said that it is a European war and we don't need to get involved. But I think that there came a point when Germany submerged the American ship, and then America had no choice but to get involved in the war. But then again, after the war, it again led its policy of isolation. It didn't get much involved in the treaties and in other arrangements, political arrangements done by the Allied powers, because the Congress, the Americans didn't want the President Wilson at the time to get involved in the European affairs. So, but how did the First World War, started? That is very important to know, because Britain got involved. As we know that Britain has been, has become literally a superpower with their supreme naval power, navy ships, so it wasn't a difficult thing for them to get involved, and so I just mentioned who were the Allied powers, and the Central powers, the powers in opposition, were Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Ottoman Empire. So this is the two powers, two groups. There were other countries, they were involved with these groups, but these are the main groups. They were the big powers. They were involved in the war, directly involved in the war. So how did the First World War started? That is very important to know. You will find in the readings, there are enough PowerPoint slides which will direct you to this topic. But then again, as I have said, the PowerPoints are there to give you guidance, but that is not meant for an assignment. So assignments needs to be written very articulately, with a lot of reading done, with a lot of information, a lot of referencing done, and it needs to be a scholarly paper, which I'm sure you may have found it through my feedback on your assignments. And so what happens now with this First World War, which started after the July crisis in 1914? So it was, there was this internal issues in Austria-Hungary, and I'm sure you know that it's a European country. And so they were the king of the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Emperor Joseph Franz. So his name, he was Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary, and he was very traditional, very conservative. He was out of touch with the with the reality, what was going on in his country. So he just didn't want any change. So so whenever there is sort of revolt against against an emperor, or there is some issues, that means the emperor has always been out of touch with the people, with the grassroots people, with their grievances, as we have seen, as we have discussed about the French Revolution, how the emperor was simply detached with the grievances of the people of his of France. But here in this Austria-Hungary, it is a different situation. It was not, again, the people of Austria-Hungary in general were not unhappy with the emperor of Austria-Hungary, Emperor Franz Joseph. It was just a section of people who were living in Austria-Hungary, and they were the Serbians. The Serbians, they as you all know, Serbia was an independent country. It still is. So, but there were some Serbs who were living in a big number in Austria-Hungary, and they wanted their rights, and they wanted to be heard, and they wanted an autonomy. They wanted some rights to themselves, and the emperor was not would not abide to these terms. So there was this group which was considered a banned group, and it's called Black Hand. And so one of those Black Hand members, Princev, his name was Princev. I think he was a young man of 19 to 21 years, around that age, and he assassinated the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his and the heir to the throne was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So this is where the crisis started. The Serbians in Austria-Hungary, they wanted their rights from the emperor of Austria-Hungary, but they were not heard, and so they formed a party, a secret party. I mean, that a group that is called Black Hand, and so one of those members, it was banned in Austria-Hungary, but one of those members assassinated the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. At this, the emperor of Austria-Hungary was furious, and so he asked Serbia, he held Serbia accountable for this situation. So we have to be very clear, the people who have done this, the assassination, were literally the people, they were Serbs, but they were the people of Austria-Hungary because they were living there. They have settled there, but it was a big population, but they were not heard. But the emperor blamed Serbia because, you know, Serbs are one ethnic group, and so the Serbs in Austria-Hungary were more of a nationalist group, and that's why they wanted their rights. But the emperor of Austria-Hungary, they demanded they accused Serbia. That's a separate country, and that's that has its own government and administration, but. And he thought Serbia is into the internal politics in his country, and so he had a list of demands that Serbia has to abide, and Serbia agreed to abide by all those list of demands that the emperor of Austria-Hungary demanded. But they did not agree to two demands of the emperor of Austria-Hungary, because those would compromise to the sovereignty of Serbia. And so at this, the emperor of Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph, got very agitated, and he asked Germany for help because they have been allied since 1882 with the Triple Alliance, as I say. but Germany said just to hold on, let them get other powers, and perhaps Soviet Union on their side, and so then they would come to help of Austria-Hungary, but then Austria-Hungary's emperor did not wait, and so he literally, Austria-Hungary, they entered Serbia, and so this is how it's called July Crisis, and and that is how this regional war, it erupted into the First World War. So it was a really local to national to regional issue then, but it erupted to the First World War. Germany got involved because by this time Germany was also a very, very strong country with their naval supremacy, and so Germany and they were allied, as I said, from the Triple Alliance and from 1882. So Germany asked Germany sort of misguided Ottoman Empire, said that Russia, Soviet Union, would attack them. So Ottoman Empire was already in the verge of decline by the First World War, but because they ruled for six centuries very successfully, but they were declining in the late 19th century to early 20th century. Many factors are involved in that, but that's what I discuss in Islam in the World in my course. But here we won't go into the factors that led to the Ottoman decline of the Ottoman Empire, but here we need to see that Ottoman Empire, this is how it got involved. With Germany's information, it got freaked out, and so for their national security, they entered the war. So now they have Austria-Hungary has its allies, which is official allies for the war, which is Germany and Ottoman Empire on their side, and on the other hand, Britain and France, they got involved in the war, and later on, as I said, America got involved, Soviet Union got involved, but Soviet Union in 1917, they had the Bolshevik Revolution or the Russian Revolution, so they had to leave the war. So literally the main powers were these three powers, the Allied powers, America, Britain, France, and America. So So this is how the First World War started, and but then again during the First World War there has been a lot of which I will discuss it in the next Zoom session. There has been a lot of plots and plans made by the Allied powers, particularly Britain and France, and particularly Britain, because we are discussing modern Britain in this course, so we will see what role Britain had during the First World War, and this is how they have how they have changed the shape of the world. So as I said, Israel was one of the outcome of the First World War, and so yeah, and with the colonies. For example, India supported wholeheartedly Britain during the First World War because, excuse me, Mahatma Gandhi of India, he had this, he thought if we devote ourselves, if we are loyal to the British Empire, if we send troops to fight for the British Empire, perhaps after the war, India will get its independence. So that is how he was. He was more, he was supportive of the war, but we will see during the Second World War, no, he just, he changed his opinion, and he asked Britain to quit India. So, and that is how 1947, the subcontinent was divided into India and Pakistan, and when the British left, they left it, subcontinent divided into two, India and Pakistan. And so with Australia was also by this time a Commonwealth country, and so it also sent its troops to fight for the British Empire. So Australia got involved, and with Africa, South Africa, Britain was very careful that the white people would go outside of Australia to fight for the empire, and the African dark people, the original African people, so people of color, they were known as that time. So non-whites were known as people of color, that was the official term in the archives paper. And so they would fight only in Africa. So that means these people were not trusted to go abroad and to fight for Britain. So within we have to see what happened during when Britain declared war against the Central Powers. So there were the Fabian members. They were some of them were really against the war, so they were anti-war movements. But Lloyd George, he managed to have this people of Britain to support the war, and so it's normally it's up to the leader of the country to lead the people, and so they were. I mean, majority of people, they did not have anti-war rallies. So, and this is how Britain entered the First World War. Yeah. So, in our next class Zoom session, I will discuss what sort of plannings the British diplomats and policymakers were taking during the First World War. Although President Woodrow Wilson alerted them, the Allied powers, that there should not be any secret treaties. And he had 14 points, the right of self-determination, there shouldn't be any secret treaties, one of the, some of those 14 points, then there would be an organization like the League of Nations that emerged after the First World War. And so, but in spite of that, during the World War I, there has been plots and there has been plans that when they will win the war, the Allied powers. So particularly Britain took the lead in making the plans, and so we will discuss in our next class what were the plans and how did it change the shape of the world. So we all know that the Central Powers were defeated in 1918, and then through several treaties, and the entire big territory of the Ottomans, it was severed, or it was divided into different independent states. So, and that is how Turkey, modern day Turkey, from this big Ottoman Empire, it shrank to a small territory. So yeah, that is the brief background, or the summary, as I've said, about the pre-war conditions of Britain and how Britain got involved in the First World War, and the causes of the First World War, and how Britain got involved in the First World War. So until next time, bye for now. Take care.